Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Wednesday, October 27th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Penn State game is in 3 days, the game against Michigan in 31 days. That Penn State game is probably a little less massive than it may have looked about a week ago following Penn State's loss to Illinois, but don't try telling that to anyone inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. We got a chance to talk to Ryan Day and a handful of players on Tuesday. They are all very much focused on the Nittany Lions and the challenge that they're going to bring on Saturday night. My guest today is Buckeye Scoop's Kevin Noon. Kevin, even after a dominating win over Indiana and a bad loss for the Lions, it sure doesn't seem like they are taking anything for granted.
No, you can't take any of this for granted. If you come out and you say, "Oh, well, we can just kind of put this on cruise control. We're looking ahead to Nebraska." I mean, that serves no purpose whatsoever. I think that they know that they're going to be facing another good defense, especially when it comes to the pass defense. I mean, obviously there was a bit of a step down when PJ Mustipher was lost for the season, but when you look at Ohio State over the last couple of weeks, going against maybe lesser pass defenses who then on top of that were without their top corners, Ohio State knows that it's going to be a stiffer challenge. And Ryan Day noted Castro Fields, one of the cornerbacks for Penn State, that he's played a lot of football there. They know that there are going to be some challenges, that Penn State's going to try and do some things to confuse a young quarterback in CJ Stroud. And, we'll just kind of see from there, because Lord knows, I mean, at least from what us pundits are talking about, Penn State isn't a team that's necessarily going to put up a ton of points.
Yeah, that's probably safe to say. On Tuesday, James Franklin did say that he expected Sean Clifford to be 100% this week. I'm not really buying that, but that's what James Franklin said. James Franklin also said they were solely focused on Illinois, so James Franklin may not be 100% dialed in this week. But yeah, that is what James Franklin had to say on Tuesday. One of the things that's nice about getting to talk to a lot of the guys at Ohio State, especially back to back like we do on Tuesdays, is you see some themes start to emerge, which is generally a really good way to figure out which messages are getting a lot of run that week when they're behind closed doors. Like they're going to say what they're going to say, and you're going to get a certain amount of coach speak. But when you hear the same basic things over and over and over from Ryan Day and also a number of the players, it's like, okay, this is something that they've really kind of had drilled into their heads this week. This week, we heard over and over about how preparation during the week leads to confidence, and then what that can mean on game day. So, Kevin, can you sort of explain what they were saying there and what that might mean for the game on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, Ryan Day talked about, I mean, I think specifically the one thing that stood out to me was leading into Indiana, that they were so focused when they went through just like special teams drills. I mean, and he saw it in their eyes. He saw this confidence. He saw where they were at, and he knew that they were going to have something special that week. I mean, you get this confidence. We hear, we all have the big book of coaching axioms, and we know what they say. And if we make practice more difficult than the game, I mean, tantamount to having the batting donut on. You swing this heavy bat, and you take the batting donut off, and you get out there. Oh, I got this toothpick, and but then again, neither of us are seeing our teams in the World Series, but I digress. So there is the thing about the confidence, and Lord knows Ohio State's been able to. It looks pretty confident to me with what's been going on, but that leads to good successes and so on and so forth. So I think that they know what it is that they're doing. It's just a matter of getting out there and executing.
And another way that you can have that sort of the preparation from practice lead to confidence and then see that play out in a game. Like one example that really kind of stood out to me was the throw that CJ Stroud made to Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And when I say that, if you have watched the game or rewatched the game, you know exactly the one I'm talking about, where it was like just over the outstretched
Right.
fingertips of an Indiana defender. Day said on Tuesday that was something they work on in what they call the 1-inch drill. Now, that's something we've talked about probably on this show before, definitely on Buckeye Weekly with Tony before. But in case you're not familiar, they drag out these big metal nets. And this is kind of a baseball thing. It's like those big metal screens like you see when someone's throwing batting practice and they're kind of behind one of those screens. It's just basically a big metal square with netting on it. And they will put them 20 or 30 yards downfield and have the quarterbacks try and throw the ball just over those nets. It's called the 1-inch drill because ideally, like if you do it perfectly, the ball goes 1 inch over the net, which sort of represents a defender or a defender's outstretched hand. So it's just out of the reach of the defender. You're not lollipopping it over. You just barely getting it over that net, and then there's a receiver behind it who catches it. So if you do it perfectly, it just barely skims over the top of that net and goes right into the receiver's hands. When you do it well, I mean, it looks impossibly hard, but when they do it well, it looks like the throw on Saturday night. I mean, that drill put into action, and that's something we see them do with quarterbacks when it's camp times in June. That's something we see during spring ball. It's something we see during fall ball. That is a mainstay of the Ryan Day practice, practice routine. So, Day said it was only going to get more important now to be precise like that and play better and better, as they're playing better and better defenses like Penn State. So, I mean, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but can you sort of explain what was the most impressive thing to him about Penn State's defense? Like, what really jumped out to him?
Yeah, you put me on the spot here on that one. I mean, I just think that there are just a lot of things in terms of that they're blitzing, and that they just have got guys that have played a lot of football. I mean, it's just that type of situation of where we go to the beginning of the season here for Ohio State, and they had to break in a lot of new guys. That's not where Penn State is. I mean, he really likes Brent Pry, the defensive coordinator. I mean, he spoke highly of both coordinators. Obviously, Mike Yursich on the other side of the ball, but Penn State's Brent Pry's been doing it for a long time and has done a great job. And generally, Penn State is going to be doing things well year in and year out. If you go to the Illinois game, the defense really only kind of gave up 10 points according to Ryan Day in that 9 overtime, whatever it is you want to call it. But and again, Illinois is Illinois or whatever, and Illinois ran for what was it, 350 or something in that game. But I think that they largely stymied the passing offense. They were able to take a lot of things away, and I think that they really sit there and they do what they do well. It's not necessarily overcomplicated on their side of things, but it's still very difficult to defeat when you're an offense.
Yeah, I mean, Tariq Castro Fields as a corner, Joey Porter Jr. as a corner. They've got a safety who's been there a million years. I mean, they've got a really veteran, defensive backfield. Really, the back seven at defense is pretty solid overall. Brent Pry, you mentioned, veteran defensive coordinator. He's someone who really is pretty well respected across college football. They are missing PJ Mustipher on that defensive front. That's going to be something you're going to see probably maybe come to, be something that Ohio State goes after, because he is a big loss in the middle of that defensive line. But yeah, the defensive back seven is going to be a step up in competition for Ohio State for sure, based on, who they've played in previous weeks. On the other side of the ball, you mentioned Mike Yursich now running the Penn State offense, and that Penn State offense is kind of a punchline right now after that Illinois debacle. But I mean, Day did make a point to single out wide receiver Jahan Dotson as someone that they will definitely have to focus on. If you watched last year's Ohio State Penn State game, you remember Jahan Dotson. Sean Wade probably remembers Jahan Dotson, and Ryan Day made it sound like, when there's a guy as talented as that, that's someone that they, as they're putting together the game plan, that's something they're going to make a real point to try and focus on him.
Yeah, you got a program for the guy, for the dude, if you will, and they know that he is, he's the dude. I mean, he's going to be the guy. I mean, of course, there's all the questions are going to go around Sean Clifford, the quarterback. Will he? Won't he? What do they have? Et cetera, et cetera. But with that being said, it's going to be a situation of where they know what Jahan Dotson is capable of doing. They know that Jahan Dotson has a gigantic catch radius. They know Jahan Dotson can do a lot of things to make very good defensive backs look silly. So they have to be prepared on what's going to happen there. So Penn State's going to have to be able to go out there and present a second and a third option, because Lord knows they can't run the ball right now at all. So who's going to be the guy that's going to step up? Or are they just going to say, you know what? We're going to put our best against your best and see what happens there. But, I don't think that Ohio State's really going to allow Jahan Dotson to run around, in these large spaces and be able to make these back shoulder catches and all the things he's capable of doing. But, with that being said, he was held largely in check against Illinois. So it's not to say that it's not impossible, but Ohio State fans and Ohio State players and coaches certainly remember last year. And because of that, they know that it is important to keep him locked down.
Well, there is a team element to football, obviously. And when we asked Ryan Day about, someone asked Ryan Day about Travion Henderson, and it's like, well, There's an offensive line component to that. And the tight ends have to block well, and the wide receivers have to block well. And it's like, there is a whole team component. So getting the ball to Jahan Dotson involves, how is Sean Clifford? Is Sean Clifford healthy? Is Sean Clifford able to throw the ball? Is Sean Clifford able to move around the pocket to get, buy himself some time to let Jahan Dotson get open? And the Penn State offensive line is something of a question mark. So, there's a lot of other pieces that will go into whether Jahan Dotson can get the ball as well. But all of those pieces, to me, sort of point to, I don't know if Penn State's going to be able to drive the ball. So you're going to have to hit some big plays to a Jahan Dotson or someone else in order to put points on the board, more than likely. And speaking of TreVeyon Henderson, let's take a quick, run through the running back room right now. There were lots of questions after the game about the health of 3 different Ohio State running backs. TreVeyon Henderson is fine. No worries about TreVeyon Henderson. Ryan Day told us that after the game. But there have been some questions on our board about the health of Master Teague, Marcus Crowley, and Mayan Williams recently. Those are kind of 3 different answers. So can you sort of share an update on those 3 guys right now?
Yeah, Marcus Crowley is going to be out with a long-term injury, which sounds like, if you do the math on that he's probably lost for the season. And Ryan Day said it was something that was a bye week happenstance. So, not something that happened in a game. Master Teague, they're expecting him to practice all week and be good to go. And then with Mayan Williams, we saw on the television broadcast, we couldn't see it from up in space where we were sitting in the press box, but you saw him in discomfort at some point. But it's a brutal game. It's a brutal game. And, obviously they were in a position where they didn't need to play him. Beyond that, we saw a lot more Evan Pryor. And, the expectation is that Mayan Williams will be okay too, because I think Ohio State certainly is better off when it has multiple options, and that's not taking anything away from Evan Pryor, who looked very good at certain points, but got blown up on a block and still trying to work on some things, and just other youth that they may have. But I think they're going to be in good position at running back.
Yeah, the health of those running backs has definitely been a major topic this week, because you remember they went through spring ball with 6 running backs, and it's like, how could they possibly need any more running backs? Well, now Steel Chambers is a linebacker, so now you're down to 5. And then Marcus Crowley's done maybe for the year, so now you're down to 4. And Evan Pryor is, he's a true freshman. He's a little undersized. I don't think anyone has a concern about him running the ball, but some of the other responsibilities, is he ready to pick up a blitzing 240-pound linebacker? That's kind of an open question. He may need another year with Coach Mick, so that obviously is something that, is going to take a little time. So now you're down to 3. So now you have TreVeyon Henderson, Master Teague, and Mayan Williams. That is your old pair and a spare. So now you're down to 3. So that's not too bad. But so that covers running backs. As far as another topic that has been a big point of discussion on our Ask the Insiders board this week, someone asked Ryan Day about offensive line recruiting. Now, if you have not been on our Ask the Insiders board, or you don't pay particularly close attention to recruiting, Ohio State has missed on a number of high-profile targets recently, especially at the tackle position. That is not just true this cycle, that's been true in previous cycles as well. And, you have to, when you talk to Ryan Day about this stuff, you have to ask these questions kind of carefully, because the NCAA rules say he can't say the names of any recruit who hasn't yet signed a letter of intent. So you have to frame the question sort of more generally. So despite that, he did give a fairly lengthy answer about, offensive line recruiting in general, and whether that's a concern to him or not. So what did Day have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, you always have to be concerned about it, but he reminded us that DeJuan Jones wasn't a 5-star. Thayer Munford wasn't a 5-star. Offensive line is such a and this is kind of my commentary. Offensive line is such a difficult position to be able to really get out there in terms of what the star rankings are and getting it right. So, with that being said, that doesn't mean necessarily that Ohio State goes out there and their board is wildly different than what recruiting services may have. I mean, it doesn't change the fact we're not limited to not be able to mention guys. If you miss out on a Jackson Carman, that's going to be highly, somebody who's in state, for Pete's sake. I mean, that's very noticeable, very difficult to deal with, but it's what you do with these guys once you get them there. It's all about the development and being able to get the right pieces in the right spots. So, because we see at any position, we see 5-stars that don't necessarily live up to their billing. We see 3-stars that far surpass what their billing is. I mean, there's so much to it that you want to be able to go out there. You want to have a roster full of the best possible players out there, because if you have guys that are talented and have motors and are coachable, it's a lot easier to coach these guys up. but you could bring in all these fives and fours, and if you don't do anything with them, where do you stand at that point? But yeah, there is a concern in terms of, you look at where Ohio State's recruiting is. They have had to go out, take a couple of guys that are, I hate using the term developmental because there's such a negative connotation there, but it is a developmental type of process. They need a year or two to kind of see where they stand. So, they need to do better at the offensive line recruiting. But you give me recruiting versus development, development's going to win out.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that Day was maybe taking a little bit of comfort in, is the development has been really good, where you've taken guys like DeJuan Jones, who was basically not a football player and just was a really good athlete who was enormous and played basketball. And it was like, well, that guy's got size and he's got the agility and athleticism and good feet. And it's like, well, maybe you can turn him into something. And he was very, very late in the process. He was a 3-star who very, very, very late in the process, all of a sudden just blew up in terms of offers and didn't do a whole heck of a lot his freshman year. And, has sort of slowly seen his role grow, and, was maybe potentially looked at as a possible transfer towards the end of last year because he hadn't really seen that role grow. And then now it's like Bill Green on yesterday's show kind of said, like, it wouldn't be the craziest thing to see DeJuan Jones enter the NFL draft next year. Like that is a real development success story, that you've turned this guy who was like really, I mean, whatever you want to call him, a project, a developmental a developmental player, something like that, into this kind of player a couple of years later. So there's not really a lot of question there as far as the development end of the offensive line. It's more, Keontae Goodwin, Emil Wagner, Blake Miller, who another guy in state who chose Clemson over Ohio State. I mean, that has to be a concern, but they really, this is a results oriented business, and the end result there sounds like you can't really argue with that.
Right. You mean, you need to have the results. You need to see what you get there. And I think that's just one of the things that, if you look at Ohio State's line recruiting, is, I mean, they do go out. I mean, forever, they get the Paris Johnsons, they get the Donovan Jacksons, but then, again, I'm not going to single out necessarily the guys that I sit there and consider to be developmental guys, projects or whatever, the ones that have not cracked the depth chart, but sit there and have a couple of years of where you're not developing, and then that's when you drop out of a tier. You drop from tier 1 to tier 2, or 2 to 3. Generally 1s to 2s don't happen that much because you're a tier 1 program for a reason, but we've certainly seen tier 2 programs drop down to 3 or 4 because it all starts up front. And if you're not developing linemen on either side, I mean, you're in a whole heap of trouble. And offensive line, as I said, is just really the most difficult position to be able to evaluate because there's just so many things going on there. How are you going to sit there and how are they going to work as part of one unit? How are you going to reshape some of their bodies? I mean, there's just a lot to it. That's why I'm glad I've never had to evaluate offensive linemen.
For sure. And, if you want to see what a program looks like when they maybe have trouble developing offensive linemen, great news. Penn State's coming to town this weekend to Columbus, Ohio. And the offensive line for Penn State is not great. And, there are multiple issues there on Penn State's offense, but the offensive line has been one of the issues over the last year or two. And that will be something the Buckeyes will be trying to exploit Saturday night in Ohio Stadium. Kevin and I will be there. So will Tony Gerdeman. We will have complete coverage at BuckeyeScoop.com. We will also have our live pregame show, our live postgame show. We'll probably do a live show on Friday, something like that. We're going to have a whole bunch of coverage coming up later this week. The best way to be a part of all of that is to, number one, check out BuckeyeScoop.com. Number two, check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/BuckeyeScoop. Subscribe right there, hit that bell, and you'll get subscribed. You get notified every time we start going live. We'll have live interviews with more Ohio State players later tonight. And then, of course, all those live shows later in the week, pregame shows, postgame shows, live postgame interviews with Ryan and the Buckeyes. So much more, all at youtube.com/BuckeyeScoop. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.